Yo, what is going on YouTube? Today I wanted to make a video and talk a little bit about the SK Hynix IPO that occurred on July the 10th and talk a little bit about some of the kind of components of that, share a little bit of knowledge, and of course you guys can flame me for the millions of times that I'll mispronounce SK Hynix throughout the course of this video. So let's get into it. All right, so the first thing to kind of chat about here is that SK Hynix isn't really an IPO here, right? It's been a publicly traded company since roughly the 1980s and has a legit business model with legit revenue and has proven and stood the test of time as, the modern age of computing is unfolded. So it's not like, you're investing in some crazy startup with no plan, right? So that's actually a good thing for investors. Now, a little fun factoid about these styles of IPOs, or really these American stock market listings, is they're actually commonly done through something called an ADR, which stands for an American Depository Receipt. Doesn't really matter if you're buying it on your Fidelity or Robinhood portal. Not really. But think about it this way. You're effectively buying shares from a bank that holds the actual foreign shares of the company. So another example would be ASML. So if you own ASML in your portfolio, you actually own the holding company that owns the ASML shares. So it doesn't really matter. It's more of just kind of like a tactical, hey, fun fact about it. So if you see it on the trade ticket or whatever, like you just kind of know a little bit more about the mechanics of how the trade actually works. So for those of you who weren't following the day one of trading here, SK Hynix priced at around $150, $149 or so, and it kind of had a massive first day pop of around 14-ish% and opened somewhere for trading around $170. So that's a pretty big IPO bump. Now, what makes this a little bit different here is that SK Hynix is, in fact, a Korean company, meaning it's susceptible to things that go on in Korea's economy. And that's just something to also consider if you're choosing to buy this name directly. However, recently we've seen over the past couple of weeks some terrible trading days that have occurred in Korea due to all sorts of economic factors that have been going on, persistent inflation occurring over there, different stuff, same themes, I would say, that is occurring here in the US, just on a slightly different scale over in Korea. So there is that kind of different geopolitical exposure to this name. Now, I will just add probably one component here, that the Korean central bank, so the Fed, if you will, of Korea, also recently went under a rate hike, which makes borrowing and capital spending more expensive. So understand that another country's central bank and its own interest rate system can impact holdings and companies like this one. Now, one of the nice things about SK Hynix is that there's probably a fairly good chance that you may own this company or have owned this company previously through other ETFs like DRAM or SMH, my Vanex Semiconductor Bros, are out there on the internet. And that's fantastic, meaning you don't actually have to really do anything if you want exposure to this particular chip manufacturer. And I always think that in general, it's a good question to ask yourself if you want more concentration into one company, or if you're cool with just owning it through an ETF and kind of spreading the wealth out a little bit, if you kind of follow my weird sense of humor there. And ultimately, at the end of the day, you may not really be adding anything new and shiny and fancy to your portfolio. And hey, that's okay. Now, another point I did just want to kind of briefly touch on, and this is more of a broader kind of semiconductor RAM thing that's going on out in the market, but there is a Chinese company called CXMT that is another DRAM maker, right? Another chip producer that's looking to IPO, I believe, sometime at this recording, sometime next week, around July 27th, which kind of has a lot of disruption fears and another competitor being added to this AI build out race. And there's definitely fears from investors because it's from Chinese markets that it could be cheaper, better, faster. There's kind of an inherent risk there around cheaper alternatives being brought to the market. So why that matters is because a lot of times you'll see sharp sell-offs in other memory names, not just SK Hynix, but Micron and SanDisk will also kind of see that disruption. So it's just another kind of horse in the race, if you will. So it's also just kind of something to keep in mind if you're really thinking about buying SK Hynix right now. So to kind of tie this all together, SK Hynix is a real company. It's got real revenue, real growth, has a good memory chip story, but this is not really an IPO. It's more of a listing on the American exchange, which is great. And I think it's really worth asking yourself the difficult question of, do I want direct exposure to this name, or am I cool just owning it through an ETF, right? I mean, I think those are fantastic. The other component here, I think it's a real short-term market trend theme, and it's kind of always a commonly talked about component in the investment space in general, but the Chinese competition and the geopolitical nature of US and China, I think that can, without a doubt, have near-term impact on these memory names, right? It's just sort of the nature of this particular sector. So adding more memory exposure to your portfolio may or may not be a good thing for you right now. So ask yourself that question. Who knows? Now, as a friendly reminder, always do your own research. This is not financial advice, just some basic high-level education stuff and just kind of how I kind of think about this stuff as it crops up in the news and think about it, whether or not I should really care at all about it. But anyway, would love to understand if you guys maybe have recently purchased SK Hynix, what your particular plans are for owning the position, entrance, exit criteria. Let me know in the comments section. See you next time.